and welcome to the Watership Down podcast, episode 25, in which I'll be looking at chapters 26 and 27. No, really this time. I'm recording this outside again. I'm having to do this episode a little bit on the fly because of our family commitments. For anyone listening mainly as a fan of the 1978 film, these chapters will probably provide the greatest surprise yet, as their content exemplifies really well the main differences between the ways the original book and the film dealt with the story. If it seems possible, I would say that the book is a lot darker in tone. They also represent the point in the book at which the focus of the narrative, and of the Warren on Watership Down, shifts firmly from the north to the south. This seems appropriate as we reach the actual halfway point in the book during chapter 27. Just one more bit of burrow keeping. Rebecca Porter has been in touch about the use of month names by rabbits in Watership Down and makes a couple of good points. Firstly, she points out that, like trees in November isn't the only time we hear rabbits use month names. The Hazel-rah also mentions May, though his phrasing is changed in the 1978 film. Secondly, although the book is very Hazel-centric when it comes to internal monologue, we do actually hear from quite a few others. To quote her directly, quote, "While the book is pretty Hazel-centric, when he's not around we do hear other rabbits' thoughts. Woundworts in his titular chapter, Bigwigs while he is in Efrafa and during the siege at Watership, and I think Vervains, and Woundworts also during the siege. Oh, and Dandelion during the dog chase. Do we hear Blackberries at that time? And the little girl Lucy at Nuthanger Farm." End quote. Good point, well taken. Chapter 26, Fiver Beyond. This is one of the shortest chapters in the book, and it corresponds to the beautiful scene in the 1978 film, in which Fiver has his vision of where Hazel is, accompanied by elements of the song Bright Eyes by Art Garfunkel, and some of the most beautiful music from that film. The original version from the book is not as beautiful. Fiver's psychic abilities are sometimes a real burden for him, that expose him to genuinely traumatic experiences, and this is no exception. In the previous chapter we encountered human voices for the first time in the book, but they were just for our benefit, as English-speaking humans, or whatever human language you read the book in. Hazel, Dandelion and the hutch rabbits would presumably have had no idea what they were saying. The fact that Fiver, just one chapter on, gets to hear the same kind of voice again, speaking in a broad Hampshire accent, and understands it, is interesting. Does this hint at rabbits with his abilities having a psychic connection with humans that might be the origin of some of the strange references to human culture that appear in rabbit stories? Or am I just overanalyzing whimsical storytelling? Probably. The opening quotation is from Joseph Campbell's analysis of myths, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It refers to the journey of a shaman and how traumatic it can be before he finds himself at the entrance to the underworld. Definitely appropriate for this chapter. The chapter opens with Fiver repeatedly waking up in his burrow and repeatedly remembering what has happened to Hazel. This is a very human-sounding account of the early experience of bereavement. He clearly thinks Hazel is actually dead. And then Fiver slips into what might be called just a dream, in which he follows the ghostly rabbit he saw disappearing on Watership Down into the landscape below. You can clearly see how this description inspired the sequence in the 1978 film, except that in that scene Fiver has his vision while actually going to find Hazel. Not so here. The similarity with that scene ends with the appearance of this disturbing human who gives Fiver all the clues he needs about where to find Hazel. He finds himself at the place where the notice board was that warned of the destruction of the Sandleford Warren. It is March, going by the vegetation, and the man has the notice board on the ground. The man says they have to put up a notice because of Hazel. He says the notice board says something. This is meaningless to Fiver. He says this is how humans know things that rabbits do not, and says Fiver should take a good look at the board. The black stick shapes on the board seem to chatter to Fiver of a memorial to Hazel-rah. But the man says he cannot get to Hazel to hang him up on the board because he's gone down the bloody hole. A phrase that uses the word bloody in both ways it is used in English, both as something covered in blood and as a pejorative or insult. This is the crucial information Fiver needs, and once he has it, The human seems to kill him with a blow to the head, which ends the dream, but not before he looks into the bloody hole and sees something move. Fiver wakes up to a shower of earth from the roof of his burrow, having landed on him due to the hot weather. Blackberry has come to check on him. He was crying out Hazel's name in his sleep. He tries to console Fiver and tells him about the state of the expedition to the other warren, but Fiver is not interested. Fiver asks if Blackberry knows exactly where Hazel was shot. Blackberry confirms he does, and Fiver cuts short his objections to Hazel still being alive by saying they have to go and save Hazel right away. Blackberry, ever the rationalist, caves in the face of Fiver's insistence and goes with him. John Ruths, in his ever-useful notes he sends me, has made two interesting points about this chapter's brevity. I shall quote him directly. Quote, "This chapter is very short, around 4 pages, and one of those pages is pretty much dedicated to Fiver's vision. It could have been longer, but Adams made it a point to do 2 things, in my opinion. 1, he made the trip back to Nuthanger a short one for Fiver and Blackberry. They nearly ran there. We could see how Fiver is moving as being kind of reckless, but in an upcoming chapter it seems as if something bad was going to occur, he'd likely have had a vision about it. He's moving fast because he knows it's okay to do so, and with Hazel wounded in the culvert pipe, time is of the essence. 2, finding Hazel is important enough to be its own chapter. No reason to combine it with the upcoming testimony of members of the Efrafa party. Hazel is the protagonist, and his discovery merits its own chapter." End quote. Thanks for those notes, John. It is also worth noting that the expedition to find Hazel is carried out by the 2 most intelligent rabbits on Watership Down. Fiver doesn't bother appealing to the brawn of Bigwig, it simply isn't needed here. On reaching the site of Hazel's shooting, Fiver notices the dried trail of blood coming out of the culvert. He has found the bloody hole. And in that hole is Hazel, who is alive. Introduction to Efrafa. Efrafa. There, I said the word. Chapter 27 is the chapter in which we are introduced to the bizarre concept of a rabbit warren that is almost human in its denial of the basic nature of those who inhabit it. When we encountered the warren of the snares, I contrasted it with Efrafa by saying that at least the guiding philosophy of Efrafa is about staying alive rather than dying. But there are ways of being alive that really aren't worth it. I did consider a lengthy comparison of fascism and communism in introducing this warren, but actually all you need to look at is the seeming need in some people to obsessively control others in the name of an ideal, not caring whether or not they share it. In the context of this book, arguing over the differences between various forms of human totalitarianism in the century in which it was written is perhaps of limited value. I may come back to this, though, if it seems necessary. Watership Down was written by a man who claimed it was just a story about rabbits. Yet that man fought in the bloodiest war in human history. A war fought against an ideology that killed millions in the name of supposedly high ideals such as purity and security. Yet also a war in which the main ally who helped in the defeat of that ideology also killed millions, this time supposedly in the name of equality and security again. Watership Down was written and published in the midst of the point in the 20th century at which the post-war conflict with that second ideology, in the form of the Cold War, was at the plateau of its intensity, nestled between the Cuban Missile Crisis of the 60s and the tensions of the 80s, a decade during which I had the pleasure of seeing my father design for our nuclear fallout shelter in the event of a Third World War. Adams might have claimed to just be writing a story about rabbits, but the blatantly Orwellian nature of Efrafa, 1984 having been published only a quarter of a century before, says otherwise to me. I can understand if he was just sparing himself awkward conversations, I really can, but Efrafa surely goes way beyond the excesses of a Lapine culture we have encountered so far in this story. Too far beyond to be credibly just appearing in a story about rabbits in a moral vacuum. Efrafa is a warren that could only have been imagined in the 20th century. in which genuine high ideals, born out of a flawed individual, produce the most horrific consequences. George Orwell was firmly a man of the left of politics, but one of his best talents was in taking apart the way that the idealism of such individuals gets twisted into something that produces the exact opposite result to what was intended. He himself fought against fascism, literally, before the Second World War, but also encountered some of the worst excesses of communism during that time, and it was the latter he wrote about most powerfully. He would have had a field day with General Windwart. Chapter 27. You can't imagine it unless you've been there. This chapter mainly consists of Holly speaking as he recounts the experiences of the expedition to the other Warren to try to get some doughs for the Watership Down Warren. The opening quote is an odd one. It consists of a cliched Italian character expressing disbelief at the kinds of people he has just met, very apt given the nature of those who run Efrafa. The main reference to the characters mentioned I have found is from an 18th century political cartoon collected by Horace Walpole, who was a Whig member of the British Parliament during that century. The chapter begins with Bigwig and Holly, who are now effectively the acting leaders since the loss of Hazel, holding a second meeting. The news that Hazel is alive does not reach the participants in this meeting in this chapter, and Holly's account is given in an atmosphere of bereavement. Pipkin's feelings, as perhaps the most loyal follower of Hazel, are made the focus of describing this grief. Hazel's ill-judged raid on Nuthanger Farm is now seen as a posthumous success, as it has provided the only does in the warren in the form of the hutch rabbits. Bigwig is disturbed to hear that Fiver and Blackberry cannot be found, and wonders if they have left the warren. He must be wondering if this is the beginning of the end. We hear his internal monologue, and it is that of a leader capable of making balanced decisions about how to handle this. Then Holly starts to speak. He begins by making it clear how aware he is that his expedition has failed at the worst possible time. He is hoping his account will make clear why. Bigwig says no one is blaming him. Holly continues with an excellent account of a seasoned Owlsler officer's tracking across open country, that country being the gradual dip slope of the Hampshire Downs south of Watership Down. During the journey they cross the long thin wood of Caesar's Belt, which Holly correctly identifies as human-made, as it is in a long straight line, something only humans make. Along the wood runs a lonely road, which they cross before having their route corrected by Kihar, who says they are about halfway there. They find a place to rest for the night. The next day there is rain until Ní Frith, when they continue on their way. By evening, Holly reckoned they must be close to the warren. Then they meet a hare, who can obviously communicate with them easily. As soon as the hare realises where they are going, he recommends they run away very fast. He is the first character in the book to name Efrafa, though it is unclear if hares have anything to fear from the place. But it is too late. 3 large Efrafan rabbits appear, and one of them asks to see the expedition rabbit's marks. When it becomes clear they don't know what this means, and aren't from Efrafa, they are asked to go with the rabbits in a way that seems strangely discourteous. And so they arrive at Efrafa. Holly describes how it is run, and how much that contrasts with the casual warren on Watership Down. Efrafa is a big warren, larger than Sandleford, and a place run on the fear that it will be found by men and infected with the dreaded white blindness, or myxomatosis, a dreadful disease affecting rabbits that was introduced into Britain in the 1950s to control the rabbit population, and which decimated their numbers. The entire warren is designed to conceal its existence. Every rabbit is under orders from the Owlsler, and freedom is severely limited. As well as the Owlsler, there is a council, each member of which is responsible for things such as feeding, breeding, and concealment. It is also made clear in passing that the members of the council are all male. Rabbits are not free to be above ground when they choose. Every rabbit is marked on a particular part of their body by being bitten when they are born, and your mark determines when you are allowed to be above ground. I've been told that this use of the word mark may be quite unique to Britain. At this point, Bigwig interrupts to ask who's to stop you from being above ground when you want. This is when Holly uses the phrase that is the title of the chapter. The Efrafan owslet is terrifying, and the chief of the warren is General Woundwort. It is never made clear how the Lapine language distinguishes between the word for chief, or rah, and general, or what this new word signifies for rabbits, but then again, the word Efrafa is never translated either. Under General Woundwort are multiple captains of the owsler rather than the usual single captain, each of them responsible for a mark. Each captain has his own officers and sentries. At any time, one mark will be allowed above ground. If a human or a lil approach the warren, the sentries give warning. They also prevent any cracker being passed anywhere other than in special ditches. If they see a rabbit they don't recognise above ground, they ask to see their mark. A rabbit can go for days without seeing the sun. You are only allowed to silflay at your allotted time, regardless of the weather. And if there is a reason why your mark cannot go above ground, they miss out until the next day. This gives the rabbits there a particular character. They are programmed to obey orders. They have never encountered a lil. The only aim of every Efrafan, well, every male Efrafan I assume, is to join the owsler, who have special privileges, and every member of the owsler wants to get onto the council. This three-tier society is very reminiscent of the proles, outer party and inner party of George Orwell's 1984, although there are many Indo-European examples of such three-tiered societies that could be cited. The members of the owsler are expected to take part in regular wide patrols, which are designed to scout for danger and train and toughen the owsler. Any hlessil or wandering rabbits that are found are brought back to Efrafa. If they refuse, they are killed. Wide patrols report directly to General Woundwort, and the council decide what to do about what is reported. Bluebell interrupts to ask if the expedition had been missed by the wide patrol, and Holly makes it clear that they had not. He also names the rabbit who brings them to Efrafa as Captain Campion. This is easily the character that has been most developed outside the original book of Watership Down, in particular in the 1999 TV series, in which his character development is a high point of that series, in my opinion. When Holly and his companions arrive at Efrafa, they are told to wait in a burrow, where they learn a lot of what Holly has said. This is also where he meets easily the most important female character in Watership Down, the legend that is Hazel-rah. It is Hazel-rah who tells Holly about Efrafa, and that her mother told her that the warren used to be elsewhere until Woundwort made them move to its current location. Which is interesting, because the actual location of Efrafa, which I have registered on Google Earth, is at the crossroad, or crixa in Lapine, between a human bridleway and a human track. Was this an oversight on the part of Adams, or just a clever observation on the need of tyrants to deliberately create the very conditions that allow them to justify their tyranny? Most rabbits in Efrafa, Holly learns from Hazel-rah, die of old age or are killed by the owsler. All digging is supervised by the owsler to make sure it is concealed, and the warren is severely overcrowded. What a contrast with the warren of the snares. There are more does than bucks in Efrafa, and many does cannot breed. A group of does had recently gone to the council to ask if they could leave and were firmly refused. From her account, the whole system is breaking down. Holly and his companions are then taken to see the council, who meet in a long, narrow burrow that is not as impressive as the honeycomb. They are just another piece of business. Before they are dealt with, a rabbit who tried to escape from Efrafa is brought before the council by the dreaded Auslaffer, or council police, or reminiscent of the Gestapo or the KGB. This terrified rabbit is called Blackberry. He tries to explain himself, then begs for mercy before having both his ears ripped to shreds. A member of the Auslaffer tells Holly he is lucky to be alive. This is the atmosphere in which Holly and his party are then taken to see the council. And then they meet General Woundwort, a rabbit almost as big as a hare, who is clearly a very nasty piece of work. Woundwort has no interest in why they have travelled to Efrafa. He simply explains the rules under which they will live in Efrafa. When Holly tries to explain that they are an embassy from another Warren, this is dismissed by Woundwort. They are just part of Efrafa now, and that's that. After another member of the council intervenes, it becomes clear to Holly that they are not guests. They are prisoners. Strawberry tries to intervene, talking of animals not behaving like men, but how would he know how humans treat one another? And isn't it perhaps a bit rich, given his background, for him to comment in this way, despite his rehabilitation? John Ruth has made this point very persuasively in his notes to me. The expedition are told they will join the right flank mark under Captain Bugloss. Holly is careful to avoid the captain, in case he decides to mark them straight away. Already Holly can see the system is breaking down. It is far too easy to remain anonymous due to the overcrowding. In the middle of the night, they are called for Silflay. Holly thinks this might be a chance to make a run for it, but the sentries are everywhere. As well as this, the captain of the mark keeps 2 runners with him, able to head directly to the site of any alarm. This is all very reminiscent of the Berlin Wall of the Cold War, the mere existence of which I saw denied by my own eyes in the 1980s by a representative from the Soviet embassy in London at my college here in Sussex. They invited him in a spirit of peace. Well, fair enough. But facts are still facts. Holly and his companions stay as anonymous as they can. They join a group listening to the story of the King's Lettuce. Holly comments that the storyteller was nowhere near as good as Dandelion. But Holly wasn't at the Warren of the Snares when Dandelion told the story, so does this mean he heard it told by him at Sandleford, or was this an error on the part of Adams? In any case, the story gives Holly an idea. And the Efrafan bureaucracy having made the mistake of putting all of them together in the same burrow, Holly is able to use this idea to get them all out of Efrafa. It occurs to him that Captain Bugloss is a bit overstretched in his role, so given the inclination of Efrafan rabbits to obey orders without question, Holly decides to adopt the role of a messenger from the council, just as his mark are going on Silflay. Bugloss is sceptical, but Holly's threat to go back to the council with his refusal does the trick. The Watership down rabbits immediately escape. 2 sentries confront them, injuring Buckthorn, but the 4 of them get away, heading in any direction. They get a head start due to the mark captain's absence, but the Efrafan Hazel-rah are soon in pursuit and overtaking them. They fear nothing as much as the council. Just as Holly thinks they will have to turn and fight, they come to a steep bank which they climb. This is a railway embankment. Reaching the top, they find what is obviously the track bed, though Holly has no awareness of this. The rails are humming. We, as humans, know what that means. They fall down the other side of the embankment and then experience the passing of a train as a visitation for one of Lord Frith's messengers, which overwhelms Holly. It would be far more frightening than just a car. Finding each other again in the dark and the rain, they spend the night on the far side of the Iron Road, as it will be called. Next day, Holly finds a tunnel under the track, and they begin the journey north back to Watership Down. He is very casual about his ability to find such things and know which way to go, but he is clearly an excellent tracker. He would probably have made an excellent Efrafan officer, in fact. It is a very difficult journey, and only Silver makes it back in a healthy condition. But they meet no Efrafans. It takes a day and a night, and they do not rest. Holly gets back in the same kind of dream state as he was when he first arrived at Watership Down. Strawberry is the same. And Buckthorn has been injured for a 2nd time. They return to the news of Hazel's death, though this low point for them isn't quite as bad for us as readers, as we know that he is alive. Holly has been asked if he will become chief, but he says he isn't up to it. Could this mean he might be eventually? He would have made an excellent chief, I think, and Bigwig, who is currently de facto co-chief, would have fallen in behind him, as he was once under Holly in the Sandleford Warren, especially as Holly is a bit less overbearing now. However, that is another story, one in which Hazel is gone. Were it not for what we know as readers, this would truly be the lowest point in the story. Thank you once again to John Ruth for his notes and to Rebecca Porter for her comments and corrections. Next time, Hazel returns to Watership Down and hatches a plan that will make the raid on Nuthanger Farm seem like a walk in the park.